I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who would stand in a courtroom, staring at men I once trusted more than family, and take everything back from them. But here I am. They tried to erase me. They tried to pretend I didn't build the very company that made them rich. For a long time, I let their silence swallow me. But silence has teeth, and when you sharpen it long enough, it cuts deeper than any blade. This is my story. I was 26 when it all started. Fresh out of grad school, carrying nothing but student loans, secondhand blazers, and an idea I couldn't let go of. The idea wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the kind of thing you pitch on stage with confetti falling around you. It was practical, useful, something that solved a problem nobody had solved well before. At the time, I was living in a one-bedroom apartment in Boston, peeling paint on the walls, a radiator that hissed like a snake every winter night. My bed was just a mattress on the floor. But in the corner of that room sat my laptop, stacks of notebooks, and scribbled flowcharts taped to the wall. That was my real home, my real obsession. I didn't have money, but I had vision. And when you're young enough, hungry enough, you think vision is all you need. Of course, vision alone doesn't pay server costs. It doesn't print prototypes. And it doesn't convince the world to take you seriously, especially when you're a woman with no track record. That's when I met them. There were 3 of them. Ethan, the charismatic one, always in a tailored suit even when everyone else was in hoodies. He knew how to charm investors, and he knew it. Ryan, the numbers guy, quiet, sharp-eyed, always running projections, calculating risks. He rarely smiled, but when he did, it was usually on someone else's expense. And Mark, the so-called operations genius. The guy who could talk for an hour straight about scaling logistics, team structures, burn rates. He called himself the adult in the room. And then there was me. I was the only woman, the only one without wealthy parents or Ivy League connections, the only one who didn't play golf with potential backers. But I was also the only one with the actual idea, the software, the design, the vision. Without me, they had nothing. Without them, I thought, I had no chance of survival. So we shook hands. We signed papers. And just like that, our company was born. In the beginning, it was brutal. We worked in a cramped co-working space that smelled like burnt coffee and stale carpet. We pulled all-nighters, argued about every feature, and lived off takeout and vending machine snacks. But slowly, something started happening. People noticed. Our beta testers loved the product. A small angel investor wrote us a check. Articles started popping up online. Is this the next big thing in tech? And through it all, I carried the product like a newborn child. Every bug fix at 2 a.m., every pitch deck rewritten the night before. Every sleepless night spent wondering if this dream was worth the cost. The guys? They were useful. Don't get me wrong. Ethan's charm opened doors. Ryan's spreadsheets kept us from burning out too fast. Mark's bluster impressed early hires. But the soul of the company, the very thing we were selling, came from me. And they knew it. Or at least I thought they did. The first red flag came during our Series A pitch. We were in a glass conference room 10 floors above Manhattan. I'd rehearsed my part for days, how the product worked, why it mattered, what the future looked like. But when the big moment came, Ethan slid my slides right past. He didn't introduce me, didn't hand me the mic. He just kept talking, telling my story, using my words, claiming my vision. And the investors? They leaned in. They nodded. They laughed at his jokes. I said they're frozen, invisible. Afterwards, I pulled him aside. I said, Ethan, why didn't you let me speak? You know the product inside and out. He smirked, straightened his cufflinks, and said, Relax, they trust me more. You'll get your turn eventually. Eventually. That word hung in my chest like a stone. It didn't happen all at once. At first, it was little things. my name being left off an email chain, a press article quoting only Ethan, Ryan, and Mark, a team meeting where my suggestions were rephrased by a man and suddenly celebrated. Then it grew louder. Job titles shifted. I went from co-founder to head of product, from equal partner to employee. And when I pushed back, Mark clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Don't worry, we'll make sure you're taken care of. Just focus on the work." Taken care of. Like I was a pet, not a partner. Still, I kept working because I believed in what we built, because I thought the company's success would eventually speak louder than their erasure. But I was wrong. The moment that broke me came 3 years in. By then, the company was exploding. We had a beautiful office, over 50 employees, millions in revenue. And one afternoon, HR asked me to sign some updated paperwork. I skimmed it quickly. At first glance, it looked standard. Clauses about intellectual property, equity distribution, corporate governance. But something made me stop. I read it again, slower. And there it was. My equity, my ownership, was gone. Somehow, some way, they had restructured the company on paper, and in the fine print, buried under legal jargon, I had been reduced from founder to a salaried employee. My shares transferred, my rights waived, my life's work stolen. I remember walking out of that office. The city was loud, cars honking, people rushing past. But inside me, it was silent. They had cut me out of my own company, and that silence was the start of something they would regret. I didn't sign it. I couldn't. Every nerve in my body was screaming. But the damage had already been done. Because when I went back to the office the next morning, my badge didn't work. I thought it was a glitch. I laughed it off, waved at security, said, "It's just a tech issue." But the guard wouldn't let me in. A few minutes later, Ethan appeared in the lobby, flanked by Ryan and Mark. Ethan gave me that polished smile, the same smile he'd used on investors, journalists, anyone gullible enough to believe him. "Look," he said, hands raised like he was calming a child. "This is just business. Don't make it messy." "Messy?" I asked. My voice shook, but I forced it to stay low. "You stole my company?" Ryan adjusted his glasses, eyes cold as steel. "Correction, we secured the company. You were a risk factor. Too emotional, too difficult." Mark crossed his arms and added, "You'll still get a severance package. You should be grateful. Most people don't walk away with anything." Grateful. They wanted me to thank them for cutting me out of my own creation. I remember staring at them. 3 men in tailored suits, standing tall, looking down on me like I was some intern they'd outgrown. And in that moment, something inside me broke. The weeks after felt like free fall. I sat in my apartment, different from the first one, but just as small, just as lonely. Boxes of old prototypes, drafts of code, abandoned notebooks stacked against the wall. Every morning, I opened my phone and saw headlines about their success. Ethan giving interviews, Ryan announcing partnerships, Mark boasting about growth. Not once did my name appear. Not once did anyone mention the woman who had bled for that product. Friends avoided me, some out of awkwardness, others because they didn't want to pick sides. My parents said, "Just move on, find another job, you're still young." But I wasn't just grieving a job. I was grieving a piece of myself they had ripped out and claimed as theirs. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, replay every meeting,
every handshake, every time I had ignored the red flags because I thought they needed me. I stopped answering calls, stopped cooking. Some days I didn't leave bed. The silence in my apartment grew thick. It pressed against me, suffocating, until I thought I'd drown in it. One night, I pulled out an old hard drive, opened the earliest sketches of the product, my notes, my diagrams, all with timestamps, metadata, proof that I had been the origin. And I cried. Not out of weakness, but out of rage. Because I realized I still had everything I needed. The collapse lasted months, but slowly, cracks of light broke through. I forced myself to run in the mornings just to feel my body moving again. I went back to therapy, sat in that chair week after week until my voice stopped shaking when I said their names. And one day, my therapist asked me, "What would justice look like for you?" The word hit me like lightning. Justice. Not revenge, not money. Justice. And suddenly, the fog lifted. Because I remembered something. Buried in all those contracts, all those updated agreements they thought I'd sign, I still had leverage. I still had my original IP filings. I still had early investor emails with my name as sole founder. I still had witnesses who remembered the truth. They thought they'd erased me, but paper has memory, and I had kept every scrap.
So I stayed quiet. I didn't lash out online. I didn't call journalists. I didn't storm their office. I let them believe they had won. Because predators get careless when they think their prey is gone. And while they smiled for cameras and bragged on panels, I started building something stronger, a case. I started with a binder, a thick, ugly, black binder. Inside it, I placed every scrap of proof I had: emails, design sketches, timestamps, signed investor notes, screenshots of code commits, even old receipts showing I had paid for software licenses out of my own account. Piece by piece, I assembled my story. Not the story they told the world, but the truth. At first, it felt impossible. They had money, influence, entire legal teams at their disposal. All I had was paper, and my memory. But paper, unlike people, doesn't lie. I thought I was alone. Turns out I wasn't. One night, I met up with Sarah, an old employee who had left the company after the early days. We sat in a dim cafe, her hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug. She leaned across the table and whispered, "They treated you horribly. Everyone knew it, but we were scared." I asked her, "Would you testify if it came to that?" Her eyes darted, nervous, but then she nodded. "Yes, I owe you that much." Then came Daniel, one of our earliest angel investors. He had put $25,000 into the company back when it was just a half-functioning prototype. I met him in his office, a quiet place lined with bookshelves and old family photos. When I showed him the paperwork, the restructuring, his face darkened. "I remember those early days," he said, voice low. "You pitched me, not them. You carried that room." He pulled out his old email threads and forwarded them to me. In them, he had written, "She's the real deal. She's the founder. Back her." My hands shook as I saved the files. One by one, witnesses began stepping forward. Not loudly, not publicly, but quietly, steadily. And my binder grew heavier. Finding the right lawyer was the hardest part. Most turned me away. Too expensive, too risky. They'll bury you. But then I met Angela Lee. She was sharp, mid-40s, always dressed in muted grays. No flashy office, no big ego. When I laid the binder on her desk,
She didn't skim. She read every page, slowly. Finally, she looked up and said, "You're not crazy. They stole your company, and I can help you take it back." For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Building a case isn't glamorous. It's endless hours of paperwork, depositions, discovery requests, but each step felt like laying bricks in a fortress. Angela guided me. She taught me how to speak with precision, how to strip emotion from facts. She said, "Let the evidence tell the story, not your anger." So I practiced over and over. At night, I would stand in front of a mirror, binder in hand, whispering the timeline like a confession, until the stories stopped sounding like pain and started sounding like proof. While I prepared in silence, they grew louder. Ethan gave an interview in a glossy magazine. He talked about his vision, his creation. Ryan bragged about their market dominance, their unstoppable rise. Mark? He laughed on stage at a conference and said, "Our team is everything. We've never had weak links." They thought I was gone, erased, forgotten. But arrogance has a way of writing its own downfall. Because the more they talked, the more contradictions slipped out. And Angela was waiting with a pen in hand. The first crack came not in court, but in the press. Angela had me sit down with a journalist she trusted, not for a flashy article, not for a scandal, just the truth. The journalist listened for hours. He took notes, asked questions, checked every piece of evidence I showed him. And 2 weeks later, the article dropped. "The Forgotten Founder. Did Keck's hottest startup erase its true creator?" My name on the front page of a major outlet. The internet erupted. Some called me bitter. Some called me brave. But suddenly, silence was no longer an option. My inbox flooded with messages. Ex-employees, investors, even strangers who said, "I believe you. I saw the same thing happen to my sister, my friend, my colleague." The company issued a statement calling my claims false and misleading. But denial only poured gasoline on the fire, because people started digging. Old screenshots, archived posts, photos of me at early product launches, evidence I hadn't even known still existed. And slowly, the world started seeing the cracks I had been screaming about for years. By the time the lawsuit was filed, the company's glossy image was already fraying. Stockholders whispered, employees muttered in private chats, and the men I once called partners, they finally realized I wasn't going away. But what they didn't know was that the courtroom was where I felt strongest, because the truth wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to the paper. It belonged to the witnesses. It belonged to the silence I had sharpened into a weapon. And soon, I would place it in front of a judge and watch it cut them apart. The first day in court, I walked alone. No entourage, no cameras, just me. I wore a simple black suit, no jewelry, no makeup beyond the bare minimum. I wanted the jury to see me as I was, a woman, stripped down, carrying only the truth. Across the aisle, they sat like kings. Ethan, Ryan, Mark. Tailored suits, expensive lawyers, confidence dripping off them like cologne. They didn't look at me. Not once. That was their first mistake. Angela stood like a blade at my side. Sharp, precise, unforgiving.
"Miss Reynolds," she said to the jury, holding up a contract, "you'll notice the plaintiff's name, my client's name, on the original incorporation papers." The jury leaned forward. One by one, the papers came out. Emails, signatures, early investor memos, each carrying my fingerprints, my handwriting, my timestamp. Then Sarah took the stand. Her voice trembled at first, but then it hardened. "I was there. She built it. We all knew it. They forced her out." The defense tried to tear her down, called her disgruntled, biased, but every denial only made her firmer. And the jury, they saw it. Then came Daniel, the investor. He was calm, measured, almost fatherly. "I wrote that first check because of her. Without her, there would be no company." And when the defense tried to corner him, he simply leaned back and said, "Gentlemen, I've been investing for 30 years. I know a founder when I see one." The jury nodded. The cracks widened. Finally, it was my turn. I sat in the witness chair, my palms damp, my throat dry. Angela's questions were gentle. She led me through the timeline, step by step. And when she asked, "What did it feel like being cut out of your own company?" I told the truth. It felt like dying, like being erased, like watching your child call someone else mother. The courtroom went silent. Even the defense shifted uncomfortably. Then came their turn. Their lawyer stood, tall, arrogant. He sneered. "Isn't it true you were unstable, emotional, difficult to work with?" I looked at him, then at the jury, and I said, "Of course I was emotional. They stole my life's work. What sane person wouldn't be?" The words hung in the air, unpolished, raw, real, and the jury believed me. The final strike didn't come from my mouth. It came from Angela's. In her closing argument, she revealed something we had kept hidden until the perfect moment. She held up a hard drive. "Ladies and gentlemen, this contains the original codebase, written entirely by my client, every line timestamped, every entry traceable to her machine." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Ethan's face drained of color. Ryan's jaw tightened. Mark looked like he might choke, because they knew that was checkmate. No denial, no spin, no polished magazine article could erase that. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the verdict was clear. Fraud, misappropriation, breach of contract, damages awarded, ownership restored. I didn't cry when the gavel hit. I didn't smile. I just exhaled, like I had been holding my breath for years. The men didn't look so powerful anymore. Their suits looked smaller, their shoulders hunched. Ethan finally glanced at me as I walked past him, and for the first time, his smile was gone. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Now, when I think back on it, it wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the company. It was about being seen, about proving I had existed. They tried to erase me, but I carved my name back into the record, not with rage, not with forgiveness, but with truth. And that is a kind of revenge no one can take away. I didn't just win back my company. I won back myself.